So it has been a popular pastime of regressives to label anyone that raises questions or concerns over the compatibility of the Islamic faith or Muslim immigration to be labelled as some kind of ignorant bigot, an Islamophobe, even a racist, which is always an interesting choice since Muslims aren't a race. But hey, just read off any old entry from your bigotry bingo card when trying to silence opinions you don't agree with. But a couple of weeks ago, the regressive narrative had a little setback here in Australia. Back on the 21st of September, the folks at Essential put out a poll on Muslim immigration, and they asked one simple question. Would you support or oppose a ban on Muslim immigration to Australia? 49% support, 40% opposed, and 11% said they don't know. So the regressives have a little problem. They have to risk calling more than half of Australians bigots, which usually doesn't go down too well. Still, it didn't stop that complete joke Tim Sapothasamy, the Racial Discrimination Commissioner, from trying to scapegoat the result on Pauline Hanson. Quote, "Not a week goes by when we don't see or hear from her or her ideas, including on immigration. There is a risk that what were once unacceptable ideas about race, religion and immigration are now being normalised." So for non-Australian viewers, Pauline Hanson is head of the One Nation Party that won 4 Senate seats in the recent Australian federal election. She gave her maiden speech to the Senate just 1 week before this poll, and as part of her political platform, she called for a royal commission into Islam and a ban on Muslim immigration. And during this speech, the far-left Greens Party, as you can see here, staged a protest and walked out, with their leader citing Pauline Hanson's speech as vulgar, offensive and hateful. But just 1 week later, we learned from that same poll that over a third of Greens voters actually agree with Pauline Hanson on this issue. How embarrassing. But back to little Timmy and his argument that Pauline Hanson was responsible for the 49% of those polled that supported the ban on Muslim immigration. Well, it doesn't really stack up given that Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party garnered just 4.5% of the vote. And besides, there's been plenty of evidence that negative attitudes towards Muslim immigration have been around before Pauline Hanson showed up. In a Roy Morgan poll in 2013, only 16% of respondents agreed that Australia was becoming a better place as a result of Islam, while 71% disagreed. In 2015, the Australian Institute for Progress found that only 8% of Australians thought Muslim immigration had been good for Australia, and 48% thought it had been bad. Now, there was a follow-up question to this survey that asked those that support a ban, what is the main reason you support a ban on Muslim immigration? And overwhelmingly, the most common response was, they do not integrate into Australian society. Now, regressives are quick to point out that Australia has a history of misplaced fears about immigrants, that Australians have been apprehensive about successive waves of immigrants in the past, but those immigrants have integrated successfully, and that we should give our most recent Muslim arrivals the same chance. But as Mark Latham recently pointed out in a Daily Telegraph article, quote, "The elites talk of Muslim Australians as if they can still be regarded as newly arrived migrants. Yet here in Western Sydney, we've seen significant numbers of Muslims arriving from the mid-1980s onwards. The Essential poll comes after 30 years of Islamic settlement and interaction with the broader community. After a similar time period, the Southern Europeans and Asians had overcome any teething problems and been comprehensively welcomed into the Australian family. What's gone wrong with perceptions of Islam? In short, Australians are judging Muslims on the evidence around them, and on 2 fronts, the Arabic work ethic and the hardline religious values. The verdict is unfavourable. It must be terribly annoying for the inner city elites, but out in the suburbs and regions, people are resolutely empirical. If they see a problem grounded in fact and lived experience, they respond to it negatively. Let me pass on an inconvenient truth from my 18 years in elected office in southwest Sydney. Invariably, when Southern European and Asian constituents came to see me, they wanted to either establish new businesses or expand existing enterprises. I grew to admire their strong work ethic. Conversely, the emphasis among Middle Eastern Muslims was on accessing welfare payments and government grants. The extraordinary level of welfare dependency in such places as Lakemba, Punchbowl and Marylands is further evidence of this phenomenon. If Arabic Muslims want to be better regarded in the Australian community, they need to make a bigger contribution to the earned economy. So Latham doesn't provide any hard data on the Muslim work ethic, but a University of South Australia study published in 2015 showed that Muslim unemployment rates were roughly double that of the Australian average, and that disability dependency amongst older Muslims were again significantly higher than the Australian average, with the 60 to 69-year-old age group almost 4 times as likely to need assistance with core activities. Imprisonment rates aren't favourable either. According to the same report, Muslims make up 3.5% of the population of New South Wales, but just over 9% of the prison population, and 3% of the Victorian population, but 8% of Victorian prisoners. Probably more disturbingly, according to this report, roughly 5 times the number of Australian Muslims have pledged allegiance to Islamist military organisations than have joined the Australian Defence Forces. Additionally, in the 2014 Scanlon Social Cohesion Survey, of those surveyed, 5% or less had negative attitudes towards Christians or Buddhists. 5 times that number, or 25%, had negative attitudes towards Muslims. So when looked at in aggregate, not exactly a model of integration. And then, of course, there's the strict adherence to the tenets of the Muslim faith, well summarised again by Mark Latham. Quote, "A literal reliance on the ancient words of the Quran is a recipe for demonising gays, non-submissive women, and non-believers. This adds to the likelihood of terrorism via the radicalisation of confused, alienated youth. It is insufficient to say that the meaning and application of the ancient text can never change, a position taken by the Grand Mufti of Australia, Ibrahim Abu Muhammad, during the recent election campaign. Just as other religions have tried to move with the times to apply the principles of the Enlightenment to their traditional beliefs, Islam must do the same. Our governments, federal and state, should have zero tolerance for all forms of religious intolerance. Any funding of religious-based organisations, whether Islamic or non-Islamic, should be conditional on those groups declaring and practising commitment to the values of pluralism, liberalism and democracy. Now more than ever, we need to actively promote the virtues of Western civilization." Hear, hear. Now, all of this is not to say that immigrants don't face challenges, but a brief tour of the data presented here shows that Australian Muslims have a particularly difficult time integrating, a reality that our politicians have been largely unwilling to talk about. So instead, as some of our elites have chosen to do and label non-Muslim Australians as bigots and treat Australian Muslims as a victim class, the Australian Muslim community needs to step up and demonstrate a commitment to Australian values. Then and only then will more Australians support Muslim immigration.